So I have BPD, borderline personality disorder.
Up front, this is going to be the shitty part of this video because I have to teach you about Bpd, the Bpds. Bpds is my cutesy nickname for devastating mood swings, frequent suicidal ideation, body image issues, and crushing fear of abandonment. Fun!
Section 1. The Bpds.
The main symptom of Bpd is wild mood swings with really intense emotional bursts, sometimes swinging into a place of emotional exhaustion, like a rapid onset depression. This can pretty quickly lead to a really horrible situation where you've just had a huge outburst and you're worried about what everyone around you thinks, but now you feel nothing. And it kind of feels like your emotional outburst was fake, like it wasn't real, because you can't feel it now because you're emotionally exhausted. And you start to convince yourself that you're just a really horrible person and a manipulative liar. I felt for a little while before my diagnosis was actually given to me, and for quite a while afterwards, like I just must be an awful person. Like nothing I ever did was valid or real, and I must just be toxic. It felt pretty hopeless, like I couldn't escape being the bad guy. It doesn't help that this reputation is given to people with Bpd so much. And if you didn't know, yeah, oh boy, is this stereotype put around by people who don't have Bpd. I've been in conversations with people about relationships, and everyone's offering kind, compassionate advice, just understanding that all people are human beings with their own internal struggles. Until the topic turns onto dating people with the Bpds, and suddenly all of the empathy and compassion is just sucked out of the room like somebody flipped a switch. Suddenly these people's ex-partners are monstrous, crazy, psychopathic, subhuman animals, undeserving of love and incapable of real human emotions. And if you're dating somebody with Bpd, you just gotta get out now, bro, before they go totally psycho on you. Cool and good, thanks guys. In fact, so many psychologists seem to believe that people with borderline personality disorder just basically suck, that there was a measurable resistance against diagnosing patients with Bpd for fear of the stigma the patient might receive, even back when the only people who would give them any stigma were the psychiatrists who'd convinced themselves that Bpd sufferers were evil, manipulative goblin people. So the basic setup is, everything feels like the most unbearable, scary situation. The world is constantly made of knives, and you get emotionally exhausted from being constantly overwhelmed all the time, and then convince yourself that nothing you ever felt was real, and you must be a horrible, evil person. And everyone agrees with you. Fun! But the fun doesn't stop there, because people with the Bpds also experience other symptoms. One common symptom is known as splitting, and basically means dividing everyone you know into either saints or devils. Putting way too much trust in people you like because they must be literal saints, and putting way too much hate on people you dislike because they must be literally Hitler. I have of course transcended this issue by being friends with Jack Saint, and everyone I dislike is actually a Nazi.
People with Bpd also struggle with object permanence. That's a term you might know from child development. A child understands object permanence if they know an object still exists even though they aren't looking at it. That's not the kind of object permanence we struggle with. People with Bpd know objects still exist even when they aren't looking at them. Oh, fuck! Oh!
They have trouble with maintaining confidence in their relationships when they're away from people. This stems from that crushing fear of abandonment I mentioned earlier. Yay! Borderline personality disorder is also very, very likely to be comorbid with other conditions like depression, eating disorders, ADHD, you name it basically. Even more, yay! People with Bpd are also way more likely to be bisexual and or polyamorous. Just when I thought I was a naturally quirky and interesting person, it turns out I'm just a basic Bpd bench.
All around me are familiar.
I've had to learn to adjust over time to the symptoms of the Bpds, and I'm happy to say that with a lot of help from the people around me, at the very least, I don't feel like an actively bad person anymore. And in a more measurable sense, I am doing a little better now. I used to have panic attacks, like, daily, sometimes more than daily, and now I only have panic attacks when I think about the Tory leadership race. I don't mean to deflect away from the topic by just making jokes, but it's obviously quite painful to reflect on this time of my life, even if it feels good to see how far I've come now. I used to have panic attacks daily, and I do mean daily, usually on my lunch break from work. Sometimes it would be so bad I'd just have to go home early. Other times I'd come back in, but I'd just be useless for the whole afternoon. So unavoidably I need to mention that when I was working full-time, I was completely miserable. And not just in a I don't like this job kind of way, or a I wish I had better pay kind of way, or even a capitalism sucks kind of way. Well, kind of in a capitalism sucks kind of way. I believe that working full-time, 9 to 5, or in many cases longer hours, is inherently pretty terrible for you. Especially in my case, having to deal with all those symptoms and issues and an underlying just fear of abandonment. Having to just get up, commute in, work all day, come home, eat dinner and sleep without any time or energy to do anything else with my life made me about 1,000 times worse. I couldn't handle it at all. And that's not to say that I never could have handled it, or I never could have learned to handle it, but there was no room or time for me to become healthy in that system. In the year of being self-employed since my last full-time job, despite worrying about rent, despite having to deal with the terrible UK benefits system, despite any personal struggles or politically oppressive climate looming over me, I've never been happier. There are obviously things that provide different stresses about being self-employed, and in particular YouTube, but I think those are stresses I can manage a lot better. Everyone's obviously talking about YouTuber burnout recently, that's a very popular topic, but I'm talking about the ways that you act in videos to produce popular content. There's a pull to perform extreme emotions in order to be entertaining, and in particular, be performatively angry, and that shit's just bad for you. My emotions are extreme enough already, and maybe for other people, pretending to get really, really, really mad about a game or a movie because it makes your video about it funnier is okay. But for me, it's exhausting. And it just encourages this idea of myself that I can way too easily fall into and just get kind of stuck in. When you're creating this energetic, cool, sarcastic version of yourself, and everyone's telling you that that's like the right way to be and validating you that that's good, it can be way too easy to just be that person full time. And that's why I've made a conscious effort to always talk about things I like on this channel. As I've said, as I know based on my diagnosis, not everyone has such big feelings like I do. So it's not going to be the same issue for everyone. I do see people posting online stuff like, my favorite character died in my favorite show, it was so sad I nearly cried. Or like, been 2 years since my parents died yesterday, I cried for 10 seconds and felt way better. And that's just crazy to me, because I cry like all the time. I cry at movies, at books, at games, at shows, at average everyday occurrences. Here are some very normal reasons I might be crying on an average day. I watched a children's cartoon show, but I forgot to eat lunch, so I wasn't ready for it emotionally. I remembered the line, "You're still beautiful to me 'cause you're my mom," from Headlights by Eminem. I was in the supermarket shopping and listening to an audiobook, and they said, everything was impossible and his stomach hurt. I saw a bunny in a pet shop, and I thought too hard about how much I could love it if I had the space for it to live in my house with me. Those are all real examples! I think I've learned to be pretty good at dealing with a lot of my symptoms, although there isn't really a good solution to just suddenly crying in public because you read an encouraging tweet. You just have to learn to be okay with crying in public. I have found, however, that communication tends to be a pretty good blanket solution to most Bpd-related problems. And because of that, I have noticed that people, my fellow Bpd sufferers, who've been working on themselves a little while since their diagnoses, tend to be some of the best, most direct and open and honest communicators around. I just thought it was worth saying that so that I'd be the one person online saying nice things about people with Bpd. Okay, that was it. That was the hard part. The rest of this essay is going to be light and easy, right? Okay, let's talk about how Bpd is represented in the media.
I'm not sure I understand what's happening.
I'm schizophrenic.
Dee, I swear you would be of more use to me if I skinned you and turned your skin into a lampshade. Or fashioned you into a piece of high-end luggage. I can even add you to my collection.
Are you saying that you have a collection of skin luggage?
Of course I'm not, Dee. Don't be ridiculous. Think of the smell. You haven't thought of the smell, you bitch!
Right, which brings me to the first N. Nurturing dependence. You're gonna wanna nurture that dependence that she's feeling on you now, guys. Have her car towed, or you can slash her tires. Either way, make her depend on you for rides. Tell you what, I'll let you out after I take a couple photographs of you. How's that sound? Yeah? Take some photographs for my website. So, look happy, look like you're having fun. No need to cover those up. My customers like those. They're like me, they're gonna wanna see that. Okay, so smiling, and... You're not convincing me. Smile! God damn! This is not supposed to be scary. This is supposed to be an authentic, fun time for you. Yeah, all right. Well, I need to buy it.
Please let us out. I don't want to be on your weird website.
Well, if you don't comply with me, then you're going to end up on the weird one, okay? So smile.
Yeah, he got the drugs by being a real-life, actual psychopath.
She keeps... no, ridiculous, okay? No, the man asked me a few questions. I answered those questions as honestly as I could.
Right.
Next thing I know, I'm walking out the door with meds for borderline personality disorder.
Yep.
Borderline personality disorder.
Borderline personality disorder.
In the show, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, 5 friends and co-owners of a bar get into various shenanigans.
What is shenanigans?
The thing about Always Sunny is that it derives its humor from a sort of sense of relief. At least I'm not as bad as them. Usually this means that when the characters are sexist or racist or otherwise bigoted, the show doesn't make the marginalized identities the butt of the joke, but rather takes aim at the bigoted characters. The jokes rarely boil down to, ha ha, they're different, and when the jokes are at the expense of someone different, the show usually eventually reaches a point and decides it's time to move on past it. Take for example Mac, one of the main characters, coming to terms with his sexuality. For many seasons the show derived humour not from the fact he was gay, but from the fact that everyone knew he was gay, and he was bizarrely ignorant of it, eventually leading to a point where Mac just happily comes out of the closet when the joke seems played out. And the show even ended a later season with a deeply moving piece of interpretive dance mirroring the conflict between Mac's strict belief in Catholicism and his sexuality.
As Jack Saint said in his video about Friends when contrasting against Always Sunny,
not to say the trope of the homophobe turning out to be gay is particularly revolutionary, not to say that this topic can only be dealt with by just making the guy gay, but it still shows the desire to push beyond a somewhat tired decade-long gay joke. And Curio is great, and his videos are the best. Wait, I didn't say that in the video.
the show, however, isn't always so kind, because it's also one of the very few representations of borderline personality disorder in the media.
Another main character, Dennis, is explicitly diagnosed with BPD at one point in the show, and a pretty unceasing source of comedy is the strong implication that Dennis may be a serial killer.
What's all that stuff you're grabbing? Tools! Tools! Duct tape, zip ties, and gloves! I have to have my tools!
Well, why do you have a bunch of, weird tools in a hidden compartment in your car?
He explodes in screaming rampages at people, he threatens people around him when he feels angry, he has a terrifying method for seducing women that involves making them emotionally dependent on him and then disappearing, and it's all but spelled out for the audience that Dennis is a sexual abuser.
To a group of people who already feel like they might be the bad guy because of their mental illness, Dennis is extremely something that people with BPD do not need to see.
As an aside, I wish people would stop representing villains and antagonists as mentally unwell. Trying to give a villain in a story a mental illness works out just about the same way as trying to diagnose a terrible person in real life with one. The efforts to diagnose Adolf Hitler historically with various mental illnesses have been continuous and intense, and for a more modern example, tons of people try to diagnose Donald Trump with mental illnesses.
I don't want to talk about what illnesses Trump may or may not have, because there's one thing wrong with him, and it's that he's fascist trash. Anyway, this isn't about the Bpd, let's talk about the Bpd.
Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is a musical comedy series about a lawyer, Rebecca Bunch, who moves to a small town because she finds out a boy she dated for one summer as a teenager over a decade ago lives there. If you hadn't guessed, she isn't in the best mental state, and although it takes several seasons to get to this point, she is eventually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder.
She also continually experiences life as a set of musical theatre songs, which that's not a symptom of BPD. So I guess Rebecca Bunch must have BPD comorbid with
Across the whole show, Rebecca does some pretty atrocious and bad stuff, including, but not limited to, stalking, manipulation, more stalking, gaslighting, an homage to the musical Cats, conspiracy to murder, lots of stalking.
But you know what? She's still a lot better than Dennis.
Even if Rebecca Bunch is meant to be pretty extreme, the songs about mental health, although they aren't my favourite song from the whole show, are really meaningful. There's one about how freeing it is to get a diagnosis and not just feel like you're a random collection of garbage brokenness.
Perfect, they're not, but at least they know who they are.
There's one about how you shouldn't feel bad if you need to take medication.
Antidepressants are so not a big deal.
There's one called
You ruined everything, you stupid bitch.
And hell, if that isn't a mood. Thank you, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Actually, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is a sympathetic look at not just mental illness, but all sorts of issues that we tend to overlook about normal adult relationships. Rebecca's journey across the series is framed as a romantic drama, but ultimately it turns out to be about learning to appreciate not just the great people she has around her, but see that she has value beyond any romantic partner. Overall, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is absolutely incredible.
As opposed to In Always Sunny, where the characters are really bad and people are meant to be reassured that they aren't as bad as them. And one of the things bad about one of the characters is they have BPD. In Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, she has BPD and she does terrible things, and other people with BPD are supposed to be reassured that they aren't as bad as her. It's a subtle but also enormous difference.
Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is constructed around creating a helpful and relatable experience for people with similar mental health struggles, and that kicks ass.
After talking about the BPDs for a bit, what I want to tell anyone else with BPD who's watching this is you are lovable and you deserve to be loved, no matter how much you might feel the other way sometimes. But when I think about Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, I think there's something else I'd like to say. It's about how much more than just lovable you are and how much more there is to you than just deserving to be loved, and I can't really put it well into words, so I guess all I can say is please watch this show.
BPD isn't a particularly well-represented condition, but a funny thing is, you could realistically read a lot of people in films and TV shows as having BPD, to be perfectly honest, especially the sort of troubled protagonist archetype. This guy? Bpd. That guy? Yeah, Bpd. All your favorite soap opera characters? BPD. Rick Sanchez? Oh boy, yeah, probably. All female love interests in essentially everything?
Women change their minds all the time.
BoJack Horseman? Bpd for sure.
These aren't actual instances of representation of BPD. I'm just saying that when people write characters to be melodramatic, promiscuous, and secretive, and yeah, they read a lot like they have BPD. And they're still better representation than Dennis.
Section 3. It me.
I put out some questions on Twitter to investigate this stuff, and while people's responses didn't exactly surprise me, given my own experience, it was totally fascinating to read what people had to say. Now, on the one hand, this isn't scientific at all, and it couldn't be called data by any stretch of the imagination. But on the other hand, let's go!
My first question was, if you've seen your diagnosis represented in media, how do you feel about what you saw?
There are some conditions like schizophrenia, or dissociative identity disorder, colloquially referred to as split personalities, for which it shouldn't be that controversial a take to say they don't have good representation in the media. It shouldn't even rock the boat to say that their representation in the media is appalling dog shit. On the other hand, some people are pretty happy with how their diagnosis gets represented in the media. Generally, it tends to be when it's represented accurately, even if the diagnosis itself is something that's really hard to deal with and people have a really hard time living with it. It's similar to how counterintuitively it can feel freeing to be given a diagnosis, because it just means that people know how to deal with your problems. It's something that society and people have encountered before.
My second question was, how do you feel about characters who exhibit your symptoms but don't explicitly have a diagnosis?
This was a really interesting one because a lot of autistic people replied, saying that there's a lot of this done for autism that they aren't particularly comfortable with because it's based on stereotypes about what autistic people are like that aren't necessarily true, but audiences understand to be communicating autistic traits.
To understand this better, let's examine two terms: crypto-autism and autistic minstrelsy. Crypto-autism is for autistic people what I was pretty much asking about here, characters exhibiting the symptoms of your condition without an explicit diagnosis. Autistic minstrelsy is when a character portrays an absurd version of autism based on stereotypes about autistic people. At the intersection of these terms is what people were bothered about, representing characters as having something people assume is autism, but not explicitly saying that the character is autistic either. Not explicitly stating the character is autistic, of course, means that the writer can abandon all responsibility for good representation. This is why, on this question, a lot of people told me that they really hate Spock, which I can definitely understand given these factors, but
I have some feelings about Spock, which we'll get back to.
There's something I think people tend to overlook, which, at the same time, when you state it explicitly, seems obvious, which is that when you see yourself represented, it can make you realize who you are. And that's why I wanted to ask my third question. Did you discover your diagnosis after seeing it represented in the media? And if so, how do you feel about it now?
This question actually got a lot of replies from people with the Bpd, which is the crazy lucky hit.
In a bunch of cases, people with Bpd answered this question by saying that they'd actually learned about Bpd through watching Crazy Ex-Girlfriend and realized that the symptoms and experiences shown were just like their own. And then they investigated and got their diagnosis. I find that really uplifting and exciting, because it means that people are learning about Bpd from a piece of media that actually treats people with care, respect, and empathy. And more than that, the people learning about it are the most important people who need to be reached. People with Bpd.
Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is the show I'd choose for people to have that experience with, learning about their diagnosis. I wish I'd learned about my diagnosis with that show. I learned about it with Dennis. I heard the name of a condition I'd never heard of before, and I googled it, and then I saw all these descriptions of having Bpd, and it sounded just like my feelings, and I saw these descriptions of people with Bpd, and it sounded just like things people had said about me, and I knew I had to ask my doctor about it. But always in the back of my mind there was Dennis, and how Dennis behaves, and how that must just be me, and how I must be the bad guy. I like Always Sunny. It's one of the funniest shows around, in my opinion, and the way that they've chosen to deal with issues has repeatedly not only moved me to tears, although, as we know, this is a low bar, but I think it's opened a lot of people's eyes to issues in a complex and nuanced way. But I can't ignore the fact that I would have spent a lot less time hating myself if Dennis wasn't the character that I learned those words from. And I guess that's a bit of a bummer, so...
Section 4. I have some feelings about Spock.
So I have to agree with the people that I talk to. I don't really like Spock as an autism allegory. It's obviously okay if you're autistic and you do... We relate to characters that we find compelling and we think that they reflect our realities, even if other people don't think that it reflects theirs. However, Spock is just at that intersection of crypto-autism and autistic minstrelsy where I can completely understand if autistic people are sick of being thought of as a robot, as a Vulcan.
I didn't really like Spock as a character very much at all for a while, and I had a hard time getting into the original series of Star Trek because of it. I liked it fine enough, but The Next Generation is objectively better and my space communist father Picard will always be the best captain. But I didn't really get into the original series until after J.J. Abrams' Star Trek came out, and honestly, Spock was a big part of that.
In J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, an early scene exposes the lore that I hadn't properly understood before, that Vulcans don't have no feelings. They have big feelings, and they suppress them in favor of facts and logic. Suddenly, Spock was a really compelling character to me, and I think now, after some time, I can say confidently that's because there's a reading of Vulcans as being just like people with undiagnosed BPD. Vulcans are calm and rational on the surface, but underneath they're intensely emotional. They're catty as all holy hell. They always think they know better than everyone else, but they really rarely do. They're more likely to be polyamorous and or bisexual. No, I know I read that somewhere.
To give proper credit to Always Sunny, this Spockish mode is exactly what they captured in Dennis. Dennis is cold and seemingly emotionless until he has huge emotional outbursts. In an early episode, Dennis claims to have not had any feelings since he was a teenager, even though based on his outbursts, this is pretty clearly untrue.
And to give a little more credit to Always Sunny, they also went back and confronted that issue in a more recent episode.
Confronted with the rest of the gang saying he has no feelings, Dennis says,
Okay, and I have feelings. Of course I have feelings. I have big feelings, okay? And it hurts.
I have big feelings. And I really could have done with them making that episode a lot sooner. There is a terrible pain in being Spockish. There is a constant terror and anger and unease at yourself when that numbness sets in for feeling nothing. And on top of that, a jealousy of other people for just being normal. It's this constant self-destructive, nagging jealousy at everyone else for just having their usual straightforward feelings and being able to process them in a usual straightforward way. I've been sick. I've been quite sick. But I really am a lot better now. In his lifetime, Vonnegut expressed sincere suspicion at the idea of going to therapy because it might make him normal. And if he was normal, no one would want to hear what he had to say. When I was sick, but not too sick, when I had big feelings but I never let them out, I knew pretty simply something was wrong. But I didn't really want to get better because I thought if I tried, I might be less me. I might just make myself normal. I might not achieve all the things I wanted to achieve in life. But I know now, nothing could be as important as getting better. Nothing could be as important as being happy. Because life isn't about waiting out the storms. It's about learning to dance in the rain. To borrow someone else's metaphor, I might find myself alone in the vast emptiness of the cosmos, and I need to learn how to say, hey, I'm in space. It's good. Don't talk to me.
I envy the sunflower for being so easily able to follow the light. I wish to be heliotropic and never myopic and always so bright. I envy the tree for being so easily able to branch out and grow. I wish to be strong and never wrong. I wish to stay upright even when the wind blows. Oh, oh. Oh, 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 oh. I envy the otters for holding each other so tightly they don't drift apart. I wish to float on my own with no boat and recognize love as an art. I envy the bees for trusting the breeze and helping the world to be sweet. I wish to be selfless but never helpless. I wish to spread color and lead like a queen. Oh, 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 oh. I wish to stand tall, but I'd hate to make shadows. I'd stop feeling small if I could, but then I wouldn't fit the clothes I've made, I know. I I envy the leaves for changing color and bringing some light to this world. I might spend some time on the ground, but I hope when I'm stepped on I'll still make a sound. Oh.